This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joire.
Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joire, and today is January 31st, 2019. My guest is Anshul Sag of More Insights. Hi, Anshul. How's it going?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Yay. So I want to talk about kind of a prickly subject with you, but it's also a good subject because we have really great things to talk about regarding that subject and kind of scary things to talk about. It's Huawei. Let's put it out there. I want to talk about the MateBook 13, which is their new laptop that was just released. And you and I both have used one for a while. So let's kind of do a little mini review from our perspective. And then I want to talk about, these criminal charges. And more importantly, what struck me most, all of this has been kind of going on for a while. There's nothing really too surprising there. But what surprised me intensely was this Engadget article that I shared in the podcast topics with you of the emails that surfaced from the lawsuit with T-Mobile that was concluded a few years back about that industrial espionage case against Huawei when they tried to replicate the testing robot that T-Mobile was using. And I have so much to say about these emails, and I'm wondering if you do too.
I definitely do. I think the case that happened in civil court, I'm pretty sure those emails were not available in discovery. So I think this changes the way that case is seen.
Absolutely.
So I think it'd be very interesting to talk about.
So let's talk about the good stuff first, because I really feel that, Huawei's been really doing a good job with their laptops. We first got the MateBook, what was it, S? I don't know, the regular MateBook about a year and a half ago or so, right?
Yeah, I think so.
It was a super light 13-inch laptop with a very small chassis, very thin, pretty much kind of competing with the MacBook 12-inch in many ways. And I think it hit the mark in most of those. I never got a review in it, so I don't really have a great point of reference. But I heard a lot of decent things, not like, oh my God, this is the best kind of things, but like, this is a solid laptop. They've done a good job. It's a good clone of the MacBook, if you're looking for that sort of thing. And then I have a bit more to talk about, and maybe you two too, about the MateBook X Pro that was launched last spring, because I got a review in it of that. Did you?
I did not, unfortunately, but I did get to play with it a little bit, and I was pretty impressed with the build quality. But I still think the whole cam pop-up thing was a total gimmick.
Yeah, I agree. So actually, let's quickly go over that because we don't want to spend too much time on it. To me, what strikes me about the MateBook X Pro, and the reason I bring this up before the 13 that we're about to talk about is because I want context. That thing, honestly, the build quality, the fit and finish was totally up there with Apple. Really, really thin and light for not 15, but 13.9 inches the width on that diagonal width on that screen, and it's a very compact chassis for that size of screen, and it's got a 3:2 aspect ratio, which is kind of the ideal aspect ratio for laptops. With I think Apple does 16:10, or maybe 3:2 on some of theirs now. I know that the Pixelbook, one of my favorite recent laptops, certainly better than the Pixel Slate they recently launched, is a 3x2 as well. And the original Pixel laptops were too. So anyway, the bottom line is the MateBook X Pro, I thought for the money, was a highly recommended laptop. And I think the rest of the media echoed that because we all recommended it. If you wanted a MacBook Pro competitor, that was, and you could live with Windows 10, that was the laptop to get, especially if you kind of wanted the MacBook looks. And then, as you mentioned, that pop-up camera and the function row keys was very gimmicky and I felt wasn't a good idea. So that segues us into the MateBook 13, and I want your thoughts on it. What is your take on that laptop?
So I think it's a really, it kind of follows a lot of the tradition of what they were trying to do with the MateBook X Pro. Yeah. I think they were being really thoughtful about price and specs and build quality. If there's one thing I can always give Huawei credit for, it's the fact that they've always had very good build quality and almost better than most of their competition in that price category. But I think for me, it was a very, it's a really, it feels like it's the right weight. It has the right finish in terms of feel. There's a lot about it that just feels right. My only complaint about it was I feel like the battery life could have been better.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's a really solid all-around laptop. And with the specs that they sent me the one with the 512 gig and the i7 core.
Same with me. And the dedicated graphics, right?
Yeah, and dedicated graphics. And I think that's the $1,300 model.
Correct, $1,299. It's a GeForce. No, is it a GeForce?
MX 150.
Yeah, MX 150 from NVIDIA. And I've got the same spec. In fact, we both, I think, received pre-production devices because they did not include the little USB Type-C dongle that they have that has
I didn't get that either.
Memory card slot and a couple of USB-A ports and a charging pass-through. In terms of ports, one of the things I loved about the MateBook X Pro was that you had two USB-Cs on the left with, I think, the headphone jack, and one of them was Thunderbolt. And then on the right side, you had a USB Type-A. They actually squeezed the USB Type-A in there.
Which I think is still a big deal.
Which, super awesome. And then on the MateBook 13, they've dropped the USB-A, and you've got basically a USB-C on each side, very much like like a lot of, like with the Pixel laptops and Pixel Book.
The funny thing is, I forgot about that they dropped it. And I went to grab it because I thought I needed a laptop with a Type-A port. And I still had the MateBook X Pro in my head, so I looked for the port and I didn't have one. So I had to grab another laptop.
Oh, crap. Yeah, that's something you should know if you get into it. The other thing to keep in mind about it is that I'm not sure, and maybe you can tell me because this is, I can look it up, but you might know off the top of your head. Is there a Thunderbolt 3 port on this laptop?
I'm not 100% sure.
So that's something to check. But you're right, the spec we got was really spec'd out. To give you an idea, my MateBook X Pro is actually a Core i5 spec, which is kind of the lower end spec. In fact, the one they sent me, I don't know where it came from because it is definitely US layout and US software, but it also has a separate discrete graphics, which is not a SKU available in the US. I'm not talking about the 13, I'm talking the X Pro.
Right, the X Pro.
So I have a Core i5 with the MX 150. I think, for my MateBook X Pro. And honestly, that combo is actually really great on battery life, especially since it has a bigger chassis and more battery in it.
Yeah, I really appreciate the high performance i7 processor. I think it's a 6-core actually.
It's definitely the newer version because the X Pro has the older 7th gen.
Yeah. It's either a 4-core, an 8-core, or a 4-core or 6-core, but it's still a really fast CPU. And I think that's, when people are looking at laptops, that's the first thing that they look at in terms of specs. And I think Huawei has done a really good job of addressing people's, interest and attention to specs. And that's why you see them building the phone like the Mate 20 Pro, which is like a spec beast. And I think this laptop, in my opinion, is kind of a spec beast when you look at it in its price category, just because it has, really high-end i7 CPU, 512 gig SSD, 8 gigs of RAM. Like, you can't really look at the specs and go, it's lacking somewhere.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think but that's what Huawei's been known for since the beginning, since the MateBook original S or whatever, the non or X or whatever it was, the non-Pro, which I never got. But I think for me, now that you bring that up, I wish that there was a version with 16 gigs of RAM. There's only 8 gigs. You get 8 gigs no matter which one you buy. You just get a 512 gig SSD on the $1,200 model. And the entry level, the Core i5 is a $999, no discrete graphics, with a 256 gig SSD and 8 gigs of RAM.
Yeah, honestly, I'm a Chrome tab whore, so I need 16 gigs in most of my laptops.
Me too.
But I'm trying not to be too nitpicky on it, considering everything else. Considering
the price too.
Yeah.
I agree. So let's talk about, what makes a laptop these days. To me, I'm picky because I'm a MacBook user. So build quality, materials, trackpad, keyboard, display. And ports, of course, we've already kind of covered. I'm not a big port whore. I don't really care too much. I did appreciate that the Type A port was included in the MateBook X Pro, but I could live without it. I mean, I bought an original MacBook Air, with the port door that popped up that only had one USB-A, one headphone jack, and one not DisplayPort. It wasn't even DisplayPort in the early days. It was that weird adapter.
Mini DisplayPort, I think.
For the display interface. And so I lived with that for a while, and then I went to a MacBook Air 11, and then another MacBook Air, 2 or 3 MacBook Air 11s, and then I got a MacBook as my travel, like a 12-inch first-gen MacBook as my travel laptop. So I know how to suffer. I know how to suffer from poor CPU, even though I've got the Core i7 maxed out version of the MacBook 12-inch. The first gen was pretty terrible, and I have one port basically. So I'm fine with that, but I want people to know that ports
I'm a total port whore.
Yeah, I know you are. And I mean, a lot of people, and it's fair. I think it's okay. But here's what I want to talk about, the things that matter to me. Display, keyboard, trackpad. So keyboard and trackpad is quite fantastic. I really love them. I actually feel that the MateBook X Pro brought that in. I think everybody agreed that it had great trackpad and great keyboard, that they improved upon the original MateBook. And then this one, I think, kind of inherits all of that without the stupid camera and the function keys. The camera is actually on top of the display where it belongs. I really, really wish that the next version, I'm hoping that a revised version with maybe a core, an 8th gen core processor and they could even keep the chassis and everything the way they have. If they revise the MateBook X Pro, I would love to see the camera move and a better processor, and that's all I would ask, honestly. So with the 13 here, they've got the good keyboard and the good trackpad. As for the display, I think it's a really good display, but I have to nitpick about one thing, and we kind of, that kind of came up in the briefing from a lot of the media, was the brightness. The max brightness on display is very low. It's 300 nits, and I think if you're outdoors, you're kind of SOL.
Yeah, I didn't use it outside, to be quite honest with you. But I think that if you're going to sell a laptop, it has to have bright enough screen.
So the X Pro had 500 nits, to give you an example, and a slightly wider, bigger display because of it, with the same resolution. Honestly, it set the bar in terms of display for me for that price point. And I think this is a bit of a downgrade. I think there definitely is one of the areas where I wish I wouldn't have saved cost. Mm-hmm. The battery life, you're right, could be better, but I think that's Core i7, honestly, versus Core i5. I really feel that's what it is. But here's the thing that I'm going to niggle about. Because I have to niggle about something, because it's so good. It's a bit thick and a bit heavy for my liking. It's not thick in chassis per se, but it has really big rubber feet in the back. The back rubber feet are taller than the front rubber feet to get airflow, because there is a fan intake under there. It also means that if you're using it on your lap, you cover that fan intake, and I've noticed Performance takes a dump.
Right.
So, I mean, the fan goes off more, basically. But so these are things that I like. Thinness and weight, like this thing seems particularly heavy for its size, and that's because I carry a MacBook 12-inch around all the time. And I understand for the specs, I shouldn't be complaining, but it seems like the MateBook X, honestly, the X Pro is not much heavier. Like, I think they're pretty much the same, which is kind of amazing because the X Pro is literally an inch wider.
I'm a little spoiled because I've been carrying around so many 15-inch notebooks. Yeah. And to me, anything under 4 pounds is light. So you've been reviewing gaming laptops lately too, right? Yeah, I mean, even gaming laptops have gotten considerably lighter and thinner, but yeah, it's still in a 4.5 pound chassis as opposed to 2 or 3 pounds. Yeah. But then I, grab like a Snapdragon laptop and it's like 2 pounds. Right. So, exactly. Yeah. So for me, weight is less of a factor. Yeah, I think I'm just saying, like, it's not gonna, like, trust me, you don't buy that, you don't make that decision of buying or not buying this laptop because of the weight. Trust me, it's not bad. It's just, I know it's noticeable if you are using as you said, a Snapdragon based laptop or a MacBook 12, or even I think the MacBook Air 13, the new one, is very close. This is 2.87 pounds. The MacBook Air is 2.75 pounds. We're talking nickels and dimes inside weights and stuff. But here's what I noticed, which I think might be part of the problem as to why it's so heavy, considering the X Pro is the same weight and is bigger. It is not a unibody construction laptop. I didn't know that.
The edge is where the connectors are. That's the only part on the computer. The edge frame chassis is plastic. The top deck, where the keys are and the trackpad, is aluminum. And the bottom is an aluminum panel that's screwed on. The lid is aluminum for the display. So it's pretty much almost full unibody aluminum, but it's certainly not unibody because it's plastic. And if you look at the MateBook X Pro, it's full on Apple style, machined aluminum out of a solid ingot, one solid piece. And I feel that once it's like, I didn't notice right away, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it's like, wah, wah,
now that you brought it up,
trombone.
I can't unsee it.
Do you have it in front of you?
Yeah, I do. I grabbed it.
Do you see it now?
Yeah, I didn't
Did
see
I
it
totally
until you
spoil
mentioned
it and destroy it for you?
Yeah, you kind of have.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But this is what I'm talking about. This is a little attention to detail stuff where I'm like,
right.
Really, Huawei, if Apple can sell a computer for $100 more that has unibody construction, why can't you for $100 less? You're Huawei.
Well, I think they're also, I think it's because when you look at this laptop online to buy it, you're not seeing that. But when you're looking at this laptop online at the specs and you compare it to a MacBook, it doesn't, it looks way better. I think that's part of their strategy.
Yeah, no, I think this is totally a good idea. I'm not saying like, I'm not saying this is going to be the weight is going to be a deal breaker. Like if you're looking for Windows 10 laptop, you need to look at this laptop.
Agreed.
I want to make very clear, this is me nitpicking almost for the sake of nitpicking, just because it's my job. As a tech journalist, I have to tell people, these are the things that to me could be better because I have very high standards on notebooks and laptops. So, yeah. But yeah, overall, this is a great, great laptop. One other niggles, I don't know, maybe you know how to fix this, but I don't have this problem in the MateBook X Pro and a lot of my other Windows laptops. I've noticed that if I turn off the brightness, the backlight on the keyboard completely, every time I reopen the laptop, it brings it back on. Interesting.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I don't really turn it off ever.
Okay. I'm like, can you not remember my settings, please?
It doesn't, I actually like having a backlight on the keyboard. I don't turn it off. So I've never tried turning it off. But as I say that, I've never really tried, turning it off and turning it back on. Maybe it's doing that because they assume some people need it to type in their password.
Right.
Because it's dark or something.
Yeah. I think you think it was the ambient light sensor for that, Yeah,
fair.
I mean, for me, the way I look at it is, and I'm a bit weird that way because I'm old school, I'm a relic of the past. So I like to manage that myself. I never have auto brightness on my laptops. I set the brightness of the keyboard and the keys based on my setting. Basically, if I'm in a really dark place, I will always use the backlight on the keyboard. But if I'm in normal daylight, I don't,
So the one I have apparently turns itself off.
Okay.
And then you open it and it turns on for a split second and then turns off.
Yeah, and then mine stays on. I wonder if it's like a BIOS setting. I mean, it's just weird. It's not like the end of the world. I'm sure it's just a setting, and I just need to go dig for it. But I mean, again, like super nitpicky diggles here. Like, please slap me while you can, because I probably deserve it.
I mean, I still think it's a pretty good laptop, and I think you agree with that. It's just, there's always room for improvement, and there's always a chance that they can make it better with the next generation and make it a perfect laptop. That's almost impossible to.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, the bottom line is this. To me, I want to be clear that this is not as much of a wow factor as the MateBook X Pro was, because that was really like you could not recommend that laptop. Whereas for the Mac, for the 13, I feel like there's enough competition between the new Dell XPS 13, some new Asus ones, Lenovo ones, that it's not as clear cut of a, yes, go buy it now. You need a MacBook Pro Windows equivalent. You can't go wrong. Go do it. Right.
Right. Well, I also think it kind of, they're trying to find their own niche category. They're doing a 3:2 aspect ratio. It's almost edge to edge.
Yeah, that's another thing we didn't mention is just like the MateBook X Pro, this thing has so little bezel, it's kind of unbelievable.
Yes, exactly. And I think, there's a lot of companies that sacrificed, having a webcam on the top so that they could, have a really good bezel.
Well, even Huawei themselves with the X Pro last year, right? I mean,
yeah. And now that there's technology that allows for you to put the webcam up there, Dell's doing it, Huawei's doing it. So now you get the best of both worlds, even though, let's be honest, nobody really uses that webcam.
That's true. I mean, I don't know. I do use the webcams on my computers because I do Skype meetings and Zoom meetings with my clients and stuff because I work remotely. And, that doesn't even make sense. But I agree with you that a large majority of people don't really even need a webcam, right?
Yeah, I buy an external one and use that if I really need
I mean,
one.
it's always better, right?
Yeah.
If you really need to. And that's when you want that USB Type-A port.
Uh-huh.
And you know what? Actually, let me rewind. That's not the problem. The problem is that the webcam manufacturer should be making USB Type-C webcams. In fact, the problem, and you can argue with me about this, I'd love to hear your take, is that every accessory made today should be USB Type-C, period.
I actually 100% agree. I think if they aren't satisfied with the market penetration of Type-C, which we can argue about all day long, you can put a real cheap adapter on the end of it if you don't think Type-C is going to work.
Totally. Why not do that? And in fact, put two adapters. Put a Type-C to a micro USB and a Type-C to a Type-A, and then you're done.
Right.
You can cover anything. And I think for a webcam product, you wouldn't even need the Type-C to micro USB because who's going to use micro USB for webcam? So my point is, I want those manufacturers to get the message. I know it costs more to put the chipset for Type-C. I know it's a little more, but please stop pissing me off.
Well, what's interesting is, we both use a lot of Type-C laptops.
And phones.
And phones.
Switch. And
phones,
the list goes on.
And phones have been, all Type-C for pretty much starting 2017. And I think the real thing is that if you looked at the state of affairs in 2017 for Type-C accessories compared to the state of affairs today, it's much better. But as you're saying, there's still a long way to go.
Yeah.
And I hate dongles, so I'm on your team when it comes to making manufacturers go Type-C on everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it just frustrates me to no end. That there's nobody is like, not everybody's on, and it's not just, it's even Huawei themselves. I hate to say, have you looked at their mid-range and low-end phones? Like the Honor 8X, a fantastic phone, not sold in the US, but fantastic mid-range phone, micro USB. It's like in Asia, in India, anything that's not $500 or more as a phone has micro USB still most of the time.
Yeah,
I don't get it.
I don't either. I used to think it was a cost thing, but now you can ship a phone for like
I think it is
$150.
not a cost. For a phone, it's definitely not costing. I think it's purely a
infrastructure.
This market does not have this or does not want this. Our market research, I freaking hate market research. It's the stupidest thing ever. If anything Steve Jobs was right about, it's people don't know what they want. Let's give them something that's amazing. I'm so sick and tired of these companies not making phones that are across the board USB Type-C. People are going to eventually have to be drag kicking and screaming into USB Type-C. Let's take the pain away now.
Right.
Like, I don't understand. Like, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. Ugh. I mean, did you see the rumors? I'm not going to probably put this in the show notes because I don't want to get into it too much, but there's rumors of Apple, like some prototypes floating around of new iPhones with USB Type-C.
Yeah, I heard about that.
It's about freaking time, Apple.
Well, I mean, everything else they make has Type-C.
That's what I'm saying. It's about freaking time, Apple. I get the whole Lightning ecosystem, money cow, and the fact that, the SC wasn't ready when they had to put Lightning in there for size reasons. And Lightning is technically a better connector in terms of like physical ruggedness. Absolutely 100%. It's actually not a better connector in terms of performance, as we know. Type-C can also support Thunderbolt. So, but I feel like those days were over 2 years ago, Apple. Like, Lightning is dead. Let's move on.
Mm-hmm.
I know the Apple people right now are shaking their heads going, what are you talking about, Miriam? Everything I do is Lightning. I'm like, ugh. You poor people, you.
Unless you have the latest stuff, in which case only your phone is Lightning.
Yeah, I mean, you have an iPad, great. Pro, great. It's Type-C, but like you're right. If you have an older iPad, even a modern iPad that's not a Pro, and any iPhone, right? Oh, well. Poor Apple people.
I'm just tired of having to carry two different types of
Me
cables.
too, and that's basically what's happening. Is like I'm keeping a separate ecosystem around for Apple, and I know we're not the use case, right? I mean, we're tech journalists, analysts. We just test everything and have to carry. But I mean, my point is like there are families out there where daddy or mommy works and has a work phone that's an Android phone and has an iPhone for their personal phone. They surely feel that same pain.
Absolutely.
And you can't say, well, you can't say to them, Apple can't say to these customers that are good paying customers of theirs, well, your work should be issuing you an iPhone. Like, it doesn't work like that. I mean, it's just weird to me. I really hope this iPhone this year has Type-C.
That'd be great.
Oh my God, let's make it happen. All right, so I think in a nutshell, the Huawei MateBook 13 is a bit of a gem of a laptop, but it faces suddenly more competition from the others in its price point, in its size, in its category, unlike the MateBook X Pro, which I can still recommend today as a really solid MacBook Pro alternative. So, consider that. Consider it if you're looking for a Windows 10 laptop. I'm not sure I'd spend $12.99 on it, frankly, but I think it's too bad the Core i5 doesn't have the discrete graphics. That would be a very cool combo. I
think that category has a lot of competition, which is why we have so many good laptops in that category. So you have choices, and I think that's a good thing.
Choices are always good, and so, yeah. So anyway, great small bezels. We mentioned that, but I'm a little bummed by the materials and build quality in terms of not build quality because it's well built, but materials in terms of that plastic shell in the middle. Oh well, I can't have it all, right?
Yeah.
So Huawei, the other part, the part that is scary and disappointing and raises so many questions. I've been a very strong proponent. I want to intro this by saying that I know that Huawei, like a lot of Chinese companies, and I've worked with many, is not the most honest company out there. Many big businesses, even in the US, are kind of crooked, guys. This is not unusual. And I know this intuitively, that's just the way the world is. But I've been annoyed with the nitpicking and the pointing fingers and the constantly pushing and scapegoating that Huawei's been receiving with our current regime, particularly, because it seems hypocritical, A, and B, it's been going on for a really long time. It's not a new thing. So that's kind of my perspective. Like, I'm not saying that some of these things, like especially this Timo robot, industrial spying thing is kind of crazy. And I want to talk about these emails, but like, I have to admit that my perspective is I will still buy Honor, and I would still buy an Honor and a Huawei device. I really don't think they have spyware. Like, other companies and countries in the world out there that use these products would by now have discovered something pretty outrageous if that was the case, especially the EU, which is privacy and security crazy, right? So they're very popular there with their phones, and it certainly wouldn't stop me from buying their laptops. So the whole issue, of course, is the whole 5G networking side of things. That's a lot more nebulous. I don't really believe that, carriers should be avoiding buying Huawei, but as a company, I think Huawei has a lot of issues with their ethics. And these emails really highlight this, right?
Yeah, I mean, my perspective is a bit more nuanced in that I understand everybody's perspective. Huawei's had some of these allegations for quite some time, and I think some of the evidence against them wasn't necessarily available at the time when they were accused of them regarding the Tappy stuff.
Yeah. By the way, the Tappy is T-Mobile's test robot that, it's a jig where you can put the phone in there and the robot basically taps on the screen and tries everything out on the phone and tries to wear out the buttons and everything. So just as an aside, in case you don't know what Tappy is.
And basically the way I see it is the Tappy case is a very clear cut one of, disrespect of IP and internal company politics.
And industrial espionage, right?
Yeah, totally. Like it's not a good case for them. It doesn't look good. And from what I understand, some of the evidence was actually gathered after the civil case had already happened.
I see.
So apparently there was some involvement where this emails and things like that were gathered. Even the CFO's statements regarding the Iran sanctions, some emails were gathered from her phone when she was stopped at the border. So there's certain things that have been, gathered in the last few years that have strengthened their case against Huawei. And I think that there's definitely some political aspect to what's going on.
For sure.
There's no denying that, especially with trade negotiations and the timing. Like, timing is never suspect. I mean, timing can be suspect. And it's, I don't think it's accidental that it happens so close to the trade negotiations. But at the same time, these sanctions did exist. Huawei did create this subsidiary in Hong Kong, and they did try to hide as much as they could that this was actually a Huawei company. And they, from what I can tell, it seems like they lied about that.
Oh, there's no doubt in my mind. I mean, as I said, that's what I'm saying. Like, I've always questioned the ethics of Huawei as a large Chinese companies with close ties to the government. But I feel like there's been a lot of scapegoating happening, especially within the US, that have resulted in like the Mate 10 Pro last year not appearing on AT&T and all that stuff that I think is really silly. Because the American customer is missing out on great devices, and Huawei is such a large company with so many different branches that, it's like Facebook is one of the most crooked companies in the US. Clearly, look at what they've done to our privacy and security. Yet, you don't see people stopping using it. I mean, some do. But my point is, it's hypocritical to me that, we should not, we should advise against using their devices.
Well, I think the conveniences, Huawei is not an American company, and they are competitive with American companies. And the reality is that they've grown their market share in both smartphones and infrastructure significantly in the last few years. So their prominence is unavoidable, and they are one of the leaders in 5G technologies, and they make some of the best phones in the world. So, they're a threat whether you are a, U.S. government official or if you're a U.S. smartphone manufacturer.
Absolutely. And I completely understand that. Like, I'm not naive, right?
Yeah, I just, I think that there's too many people that are defending Huawei without really accepting the things they've done wrong. And then there's too many people that are blaming Huawei for things that, like, they can't even prove. Like,
Exactly.
I can't definitively, nor can anyone definitively say that there's anything nefarious in any of the hardware they make, be it a phone or networking equipment. No one has ever been able to prove that. And that's exactly my
perspective. And thanks for saying that, because I think we're completely in agreement. You're just articulating, expressing it way better than I am. I'm just annoyed at the people who are both naive about Huawei and don't understand that, Huawei is at fault in their business dealings in some areas. And I'm also annoyed with the naivete of people who say, I would never own a Huawei phone because there's Chinese spyware on there. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, and it's really a lack of, experience and understanding. And that's why it's kind of, our job to really help people understand our full perspective. I've worked closely with all the companies in the industry, including Huawei. And, I think approaching everything with a skeptical perspective helps us better.
It's our job. We have to ask questions, right? We have to be skeptical. And I want you to know that I am. Like, I wouldn't be so gung-ho about Huawei and Honor's phones if I hadn't used them and been absolutely delighted and blown away by what they bring to the table. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I can only wholeheartedly recommend them. Last podcast was TK Bay of XDA Developers. We spoke at length for probably about 45 minutes about the Honor 20 from the Honor View 20. And honestly, that phone it's so good. And the Mate 20 Pro that I still have in my pocket after 3 months, I change phones all the time. And it's still in one of the phones I'm using every day because it's so freaking amazing.
It is.
So, but at the same time, OnePlus makes amazing phones. Of course, like Moto makes a great mid-ranger. I mean, like the list goes on. There's all these good companies out there, and this is not related to their business practices necessarily. This is about, what should you have in your pocket that would make you happy and fulfill your requirements,
Yeah, I think my only big concern really with Huawei, other than their business practices, and this kind of ties to their business practices, is I question or am curious or wonder in a very non-concrete way how much of the technology that makes their phones awesome is actually one that they've created themselves versus what they've actually stolen.
Well, that's a very good question, but here's the thing. If they stole it, they certainly made it better than everyone else's.
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly, you have as much experience as I do. That's kind of been the Chinese way back in the beginning. And that's
exactly the problem. I think that there's a huge cultural problem here. And I want to switch over to talking about the emails because it's really relevant here. Mm-hmm. I really encourage you before or while you're listening to the podcast, maybe pause the podcast right here. Go in the show notes right now and have a look at the link that I'm going to put in for Jess Condit's Engadget story about the Tappy robot. This is in 2011, 2012, Huawei was working with T-Mobile and they were basically having access to this Tappy robot, and headquarters in China wanted them to do industrial espionage on this product because their products at the time, their phones weren't as reliable as the rest of the world's phones, and they wanted to basically buy the technology from T-Mobile initially.
They wanted to license it.
To license it and validate their phones and have better reliability and quality control on their phones. And when T-Mobile said, absolutely not, we're not going to sell you our technology. And by the way, T-Mobile eventually sold that technology or licensed it to a lot of the other carriers and phone manufacturers in the US. Mm-hmm. Huawei did this thing that to us is kind of crazy, blatant stuff. Like I think a US company, if they were going to be crooked at that point and be dishonest, would try to hide through as many and be as sneaky as possible. But no, Huawei did exactly what's normal business practice in China, is completely ignore IP and let's steal the technology from them. And if you read these emails, to me, it's so Chinese culture. It's insane. I'm like you're reading these emails as a Westerner and you go like, I cannot believe this. This is insane. Like, are they seriously like pushing harder and harder to get more and more stuff stolen and doing it plain sight in email unencrypted? Yes, they are. And they are totally, you can see by their determination at headquarters in China, how they don't think this is a problem at all. This is normal business practice. This is what you do. This is okay. And you have to keep that cultural difference in perspective. This happens all the time. I work with Chinese clients and I help them with media relations and marketing and stuff and go to market. And literally they ask, the first question they always ask me is like, how much money should I spend on buying the media?
Right. Oh, especially since in China, that's literally how it works.
Like, I'm like, you don't buy the media, like the freedom of the press. This is America, even the West in general. Like you just put your stuff out there, pitch it, and hope they're for the best. And any coverage is good coverage anyway, because it gives you page views. So you don't pay. I mean, and they're like, well, what about all this stuff, all these ads we see? I'm like, that's sponsored content. This is a whole different ballgame. That's going through sales channels and advertising channels. And it's interesting to me that they don't understand. And once I educate them, it's a lot easier. But I think that it's at the core, it's a huge cultural difference.
Yes. I mean, like you were saying, the whole freedom of the press thing doesn't really exist in China. And also in China, you have this whole pay-to-play scenario, which they don't even understand is not really a starter in the US. I think it's a huge difference in culture. But I also think it's also, there's this whole attitude of it needs to be done by any means necessary.
And this very persistent. Like read these emails, guys. It's like, wow, like really, like these guys have already gotten themselves clearly in trouble and abandoned the blame. Well, can we get more information about the size of the whatever? And I'm like,
yeah, they had how many times did they hit roadblocks and how many times did they go back and say, well, get us more?
I know, it's insane.
Yeah. And I think, overall, this case is kind of a microcosm of what's been happening for a really long time. And I think that really strikes a nerve with a lot of Americans because, they've been seeing all this Chinese thefts of US IP, be it in defense, in manufacturing, in agriculture. And I'll be honest with you, previous administrations did very little to nothing to actually address it.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of a culmination of decades of frustration.
For sure. And it exists and it's real. And I'm not denying it. I'm not trying to deny it. I'm just saying that this article really explains and sets the tone for what it is like to work with Chinese companies, like culturally how it is. It's insane. And it's all of them. Like if you think OnePlus, because they're here, in successful and welcome, and T-Mobile is different, there were issues with them too in terms of privacy in the past. And I think it's because as soon as you have somebody in that organization that thinks like the people that wrote these emails, these Huawei emails think, it doesn't matter how good your corporate structure and how ethical your company is, because you're going to destroy, remember when Alcatel had these crazy apps on their phones that would send data back to China that were part of the installed app set, like the Photos app and stuff. And the Alcatel people running the show had no idea this was happening. It was because the company they contracted the apps to,
right,
were doing this behind their back. They had no idea. And so this stuff happens all the time. And it's why I'm pointing out to you is that when OnePlus had these privacy issues, this probably wasn't OnePlus. It was probably whatever company they hired to create whatever they needed that just par for the course that we put spyware in there.
Well, yeah, because they need to make money off of whatever they're doing in addition to what they're charging for, because, the general Chinese business model is volume with low margin, right? So if you can get your application that you built for somebody to be installed on 100 million phones and make a few pennies on every phone, then you've actually made a good money.
Yeah, except there's this whole thing that they don't seem to understand, which is consent. Like consent of the company you're doing the contract for, consent of the users of the phones. Like that's all we're asking for. Like if you want to do it, ask first. We'll probably say no, but maybe we'll say yes and co-partner on making the money. And then we'll ask the users with a very clear, hey, would you like to opt into this or not? And then we'll go somewhere and everybody will be happy. There's other ways to do this.
Yeah, I honestly think it's happened with almost every single major Chinese OEM, and not even just in smartphones. Even Lenovo had that problem.
Oh yeah, what? I don't know this story.
There's this. There was basically it was a spyware program on their laptops. I forget, it was called something fish.
It's always fishy when it's called fish.
Yeah, right. And it was some kind of ad platform, but it was spying on people's usage and reporting it back. And it was a huge problem for Lenovo because this was in the US and people were really livid about it, and they immediately addressed it and tried to get it off their, devices as fast as they could. But it was a definitely massive privacy breach.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it was called Superfish, actually.
Superfish, the fishiest of them all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that's basically, I just want to touch on that. I know it's big news and as much as I like the MateBook 13, it's kind of hard to talk about it without talking about this other stuff that's really prominent in the news right now. This is a mobile tech show. We talk about mobile tech. You might feel this is politics, but it's not. It's really important. This stuff could jeopardize the future. It's already in many ways jeopardizing our future, because you cannot go into an AT&T or T-Mobile store and buy a Mate 20 Pro right now, which is honestly one of the top 5 phones in the universe. And it's sad you can't. And a lot of it has to do with these cultural and political issues that we have to talk about.
Agreed.
Right? All right, so let's maybe switch gears and talk about the podcast topics that I sent you. There's a bunch of news items I kind of want to go over. Okay. Actually, before we do that, I want to kind of briefly mention to everyone, because I don't think you have this device, I finally got a Planet Computers Gemini, the little weird PDA Android laptop-y clamshell mini Psion 5 type device.
It's funny. I don't have one, but I had a chance to play with one at CES because a friend of mine, Avi, Avi Greengard?
Yeah, I know Avi, yeah.
He has one, and I got to play with it a little bit. It's an interesting little device.
Honestly, okay, so this, just to be clear, this is over a year old now. They crowdfunded it, and I thought it was cool when it came out, and I met the guys at MWC last year, and I said, hey, I want to review it, and it just never followed through, and I just didn't have time to follow through myself. And then I saw them at CS because they announced a new one called the Cosmo, which is, Qualcomm-based now instead of MediaTek, and has a front display and a camera on the lid, meaning like basically has dual cameras now, rear, inside the lid and outside the lid, and all that stuff. So it's improved. And of course, they're going to send me one. But, because we reconnected, they said, hey, in the meantime, can we send you the original? And I was like, absolutely. So I'm bringing it up because honestly, that thing is dope. Like, I am surprised at how much I like it. I thought it was going to be bad. A lot of the reviews are very mixed about it. Mm-hmm. And I trust my colleagues in the media. Most of us all kind of agree generally. And I'm not disagreeing with them. I think there's a lot that needs work. I certainly would never use this as a main device. But as a secondary device, the keyboard is good. I think it's very productive. They've done some really good work to make landscape use in Android and short keys work in Android. Make that a positive experience. And, even though it's a year old and it's running Android 7, over a year old, and MediaTek is actually pretty fine. I mean, we all know MediaTek makes pretty decent chips. The X27 wasn't no slouch. So, overall, I have to say, I'm kind of excited to get the next product now, because this gave me a kind of a taste of what to expect. And you can look in the show notes to see a video to my unboxing first impressions video. Yeah,
I really like the keyboard. I think it's something that's different. And honestly, I still yearn for keyboard sometimes. I didn't realize how much I cared for a keyboard until I got to play with the Key 2 from BlackBerry. But I feel like that keyboard's too small. And let's be honest, nobody wants to write emails on their phone because the keyboard sucks.
Correct.
So I think that if you can get a keyboard that's really tuned right for, use as an email device, I think there's real potential there.
Absolutely. So check it out. Check out my video, and I'll keep you posted on that. Big news, exciting news. Nokia's back on US carrier shelves. Not just available unlocked on Amazon. They've been quite a few of their phones up to the 7.1, which is a great little phone, have been available unlocked in the US now. But we now have, as of a few days ago, 2 announcements. Verizon is going to sell a very, very basic phone called the Nokia 2V, for Verizon, which is just a slightly modified version of the Nokia 2. And Cricket is selling the Nokia 3.1 Plus, which is a more recent, also mid-range device. So the 3.1 Plus, I don't have the specs in front of me, but that's more like a pure, like Android One, like they do all their phones. But I think the Nokia 2V might be Android Go. I'm not sure. But hey, Nokia's back in US on shelves of operator stores. That's kind of cool, right?
Yeah, I think Nokia has done a good job of improving their image, and their brand strength is so strong still that everybody immediately knows what a Nokia is, and there's no question of legitimacy or what they do or what they stand for. But I still feel like, they've come really close to recapturing the original ethos of Nokia, but I still don't feel like I've seen a device that makes me go like, that's the real Nokia.
Well, let's see what happens at MWC. There are very strong rumors of that penta camera Nokia 9 coming out then. I mean, I don't know anything about it other than all the rumors and leaks that we've already covered on the show. But, with crazy pure view technology, optics, camera madness. So that'll get me excited.
I just stumbled upon my old Lumia 1020 photos, and I still miss the day of that phone. Because I don't know if I told you or if you even knew, but when I reviewed the Lumia 1020, I actually carried around Budapest, and I was also carrying a Nikon D800 with me. And with no zoom, it was almost impossible to tell the difference.
Yeah, it's amazing, right?
It was one of the best cameras I ever used. And
it was just super slow. Like, as long as you were patient.
Yeah. Yes.
Because everything was running on the Snapdragon S4. Remember the S4?
But with today's technology, I feel like that phone could be unbelievable.
And I mean, we kind of have that in some of the what Huawei and Honor's been doing. Like the 48 megapixel on the Honor View 20 operates very much like the PureView sensor did on the 1020 and the 808 PureView before it.
Yeah, we're getting close.
And I think some of the stuff that Huawei is doing on the P20 Pro and the Mate 20 Pro is very similar. A lot of that pixel binning, quad buyer stuff.
And how many years ago was that? Like 4?
Oh boy,
5?
11, 10, 11?
Yeah.
2010, 9, 10, 11, somewhere on there.
Yeah.
Long time ago, when MWC was still at the old FIRA.
Right.
And Stephen Elop was the CEO. Good times. Well, good times. It depends on who you talk to. Anyway, Nokia's back. So if you want to buy like a Nokia phone, you can now, and you don't even have to buy it unlocked. I'm getting a review unit of that Nokia 3.1 Cricket wireless one, which I think is probably the more interesting one of the two. So I'll keep you posted. I've already played with a lot of the other Nokias that have been introduced since they've got rebranded themselves HMD Global. Galaxy S10 rumors, more rumors. This is kind of a no-brainer. Samsung announced a 1 terabyte mobile storage chip for phones. Samsung makes semiconductors, in case you didn't know.
In case you forgot half their
In case you forgot that they make everything, kind of like, who is it? Nissan, who makes like, flasks and for drinking water and for thermoses
or
as well as
Hyundai
cars.
that makes cranes, trains, boats.
Oh yeah, Hyundai
cars.
makes bridges and everything. Anyway, so Samsung, the juggernaut that they are, it makes chips and they make memory chips, since that's why they make so many SSDs. If you're a gamer, you know this. If you build your own PCs or upgrade your PCs, you know this. They make some of the best SSDs, in fact, on the market today. And so storage on phones is a thing they do. They sing single chip solutions for phone storage, and we're now up to 1 terabyte. The logical conclusion, as you know, the highest end version of the Note 9 is 512 gigabytes. With 512 gigabytes extra, you can put in an SD card, which is insane.
And probably
now,
a Samsung as well.
I think we're going to see a Galaxy S10 version, one of the versions with 1 terabyte.
I mean, that's what the rumor seems to be.
I think it's inevitable. If that doesn't happen for the S10, it'll happen for the Note 10. And I think that Ewan Spence at Forbes, who wrote the story, is I think extrapolated on some pretty solid, like, obvious facts, right?
Well, the thing is that if you look at what Samsung has been doing the last couple of years, most of their differentiation has been on their core technology, which is their ability to make memory chips and their ability to do leading edge fab, and then also display tech. Those three things are kind of their bread and butter, and their phones are almost like a showcase for what Samsung can do when they build a device with their own components. And then they go around and sell, maybe not the exact same components, but that tier to a lot of their competitors.
Absolutely, totally. That's what they do. And, related to that, in that story, Ewan claims potentially 12 gigs of RAM for that phone. And we've seen 12 gigabyte RAM phones before. It's happened. So there's at least one out there in China. So yeah, maybe. I mean, it's expensive.
I feel like it's a bit excessive.
I have a 10 gigabyte of RAM OnePlus 6T McLaren edition. And I tell you, I never have to close any apps ever.
Right.
They all stay in RAM. All of them all the time. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of a boost there. I just feel like I haven't really noticed a huge difference between 8 and 10 or 8. For me, 8 seems enough.
8 seems to be what you want. 6 is okay. 4 is definitely lacking these days. If you're on a flagship grade phone. 8 is good. 10, great. 12, yeah, go. Why don't I'm waiting for 16. Come on, let's bring it on, folks. And related to this, we have LG, of course, as we talked about last week, is going to have an announcement. I want to let everybody know, since I ranted a lot about the fact that I can't go to the Samsung event in San Francisco before MWC, because I already booked my flight and I can't change my flight without incurring huge fees and penalties. Ouch. A lot of people are in this boat, even though Samsung's launching in San Francisco. I won't be able to be there. So I will get you hands-on as soon as I can from the booth at MWC. But LG had announced that they were going to do an event And it looked like it might be a conflict with Huawei. And it turns out it's not. It's in the evening that day.
Yes.
So basically, we've got that afternoon, as far as I know so far, I haven't confirmed any of my calendar stuff, but we definitely have Huawei at 2 p.m., Nokia at 4 p.m., and LG at 7:30. So that's half the day. I'm sure there's more.
Microsoft too.
What time is that?
Like 5:30.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to make that with hands on.
Yeah, my Sunday is packed.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's always like that. But anyway, so that's the good news. LG is not conflicting with Huawei, in case you were following up from last week's podcast where I was worried about that.
I sent an email to my LG rep asking a very pointed, specific question, which was, I hope your event is not during the time of any of the other events I've already booked. Yeah,
basically. So the rumors, though, are that we're going to see the G8 there, obviously. But there's also rumors where they might show us a sneak peek of the V50, which is the second half of the year phone usually, and that this would be the first 5G phone for LG. And this is a Puck and Lind article. Again, remember, all these articles are linked in the show notes. Go look in the show notes below. And so we're definitely going to see a whole bunch of 5G stuff there. I would be kind of annoyed and surprised if the V50 didn't also have a non-5G option, because the V series is my favorite series that LG makes, and I don't want it to be encumbered by 5G, because I don't think 5G is going to matter for at least another 2 years.
And you say encumbered. How do you consider it being encumbered?
Because the only way you can do 5G properly is by, especially for the US carriers like Verizon that uses millimeter wave, is you need antennas on each side of the phone. So that means you can't have a bezel-less front.
Well, my understanding is most of these millimeter wave antennas are not anywhere that you would normally expect an antenna to be, because they're much shorter.
Well, my understanding right now is that you can't put a display on top of them. So let's see if that changes. But the reality is I think any 5G phones we see in 2019, I'm not talking about next year, but first of all, there's not going to be enough markets in which it's going to matter whether it's sub 6 or millimeter. Like, I'm on board for 5G. I think it's great, but I don't think you should buy, I'm calling it now. I don't think you'll want to buy a 5G phone in 2019, even though it's not going to be as bad as the HTC Thunderbolt was when 4G came out, which was a dog in terms of battery life. I think it's going to be a dog in terms of packaging. I think these phones are not going to be subpar in terms of their optimization on look and feel because of the antennas and the radios and the placements and the thickness and the battery. And you're not going to want these phones until 2020, 2021.
I think you will be wrong in certain aspects. I have different reservations about 5G phones, but I think from the prototype that I saw Samsung show, which was a working prototype,
you mean the one we all saw in Hawaii?
Yeah, that's a working 5G millimeter wave.
Well, did you see the size of the bezel on top?
Yes. And I think that was a very early prototype. I'm not convinced that that's going to be the final version.
I hope you're right. I could be wrong, but
when I spoke to people at Samsung, they were like, way too many people are focusing on that device, even though that's not the final version by a lot. So I think there's still room for that. But actually, my biggest concerns for 5G phones are going to be the maturity of the networks and how their backhaul is going to actually work.
Oh, and, right, the backhaul. Oh,
and whether or not they're actually going to supply enough bandwidth to make 5G worthwhile.
Good point.
I think that's really going to be the biggest issue, because that and battery life. But I think that you're going to see, device makers and carriers working on, balancing 5G connectivity and 4G connectivity and which bits go over which network based on power.
No, absolutely. I think all this is true, and that's exactly why I don't want you to buy a phone in 2019 that's 5G, because the market, the technology is not mature at the never mind the phone end, at the carrier end, at the network, at the antenna end, the tower end, with as you said, issues with backhaul, issues with availability, even just basic availability. So, I'd rather have, honestly, when we're seeing super sexy phones like the Meizu Zero, which I mentioned last week, and we're going to talk about in a second, it's like, I want this sexiness to continue. I want more form factors. I want more full screen. I wanted these designs to get to their logical end in a way before they get disrupted by having to be modified to accommodate. And you're right. I think it can be done well, I'm sure, integrating these antennas, but I'm just not optimistic that the level of what you think of when you think of a flagship today might not necessarily quite look the way you want it if it's a 5G package.
Well, the interesting thing is that, Qualcomm, I think, is one of the only companies, I think they're the only company out there right now with a millimeter wave antenna that can actually fit in a phone.
Correct.
And their design that they showed off in October was small enough to fit in a phone. But then I think a month or two ago, they showed off a new one that was 30% smaller than that. So there's a lot of aggressive iteration on this, millimeter wave antenna design, because they know that they have to be able to not only fit in a phone, but comfortably fit in a phone.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's see what happens. I'm interested to see what LG is going to show, which I'm sure we're going to see some 5G stuff from everyone there. So. Oh,
absolutely. If they're on it, if you're at MWC and you're not showing something 5G, you're going to get a lot of questions.
Cool. Well, the next topic I want to touch on, we touched on it last week with TK. Meizu announced a phone called the Meizu Zero, which has basically no ports, no openings, other than 2 microphone holes, top and bottom. No speakers that are visible, no SIM trays, the camera pod in the back, but it's kind of very flush. Basically, no USB-C, no headphone, wireless charging only, kind of like hence the name Zero. Zero ports, zero holes, whatever. Crazy stuff, right? And I mean, it's not the only one. There's rumors Oppo's working on something like that too. I'm sure others are. It's kind of the holy grail. That's what Apple wanted to do for years now. No buttons, no ports. That's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the fact that they finally announced that they are going to crowdfund it on Indiegogo for $12.99. Ooh.
I honestly, and you know my opinion on this, I just don't understand why a company the size of Meizu
would crowdfund. Yes.
Just like...
yes.
I'm speechless. I just don't understand how like a self-respecting company can run
Meizu is self-respecting?
I think they are. I mean, they put out a pretty good phone, right?
That was a cheap shot. The problem with Meizu products is that the ones I've tried weren't that great, and you can't get them in the US.
Yes, that's true. You can't get them in the US, but
I mean, you can, but no Google Play services your SOL.
Yeah, I think it's just I have very little respect for companies that are basically making their customers shoulder their R&D when they have a real R&D budget.
Yeah, hundreds of millions of dollars. I know.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, don't you understand? It's cool, and it's like trying to like get the feel from build the community like OnePlus did. Don't you know? Yeah, exactly. Thanks for that big sigh, because that's exactly how I feel. Because marketing BS, folks.
Yeah, you can't market a product into existence by crowdfunding it.
Nope. And so that's all I want to say about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about AR. I don't know the specifics. Maybe you can share some links with me to put in the show notes after this recording. There's been a bit of an AR meltdown. I guess maybe that's a bit exaggerated. I don't know. Just tell us about it.
So, I'm pretty conservative on market growth, but I'm very gung-ho on the future. But the last few months for AR have not been great. We saw companies like Blipper go into receivership. They just came out like a couple days ago saying that they're restructuring the whole company, and now they're gonna, have a new approach and utilizing the same IP with new investors. And then you have companies like ODG, who are some of the first AR companies that ever existed.
Yeah, good stuff they were making.
They were making great hardware, but they had no idea how to make an ecosystem around it. And because no one knew how to utilize their hardware, it basically sat there. and didn't sell, and they also took forever to deliver hardware. So they're also going under. And there's a lot of different companies.
What was that company with the guy who did the TED Talk? Yeah, Meta.
Yeah, so Meta also is having issues. They also went bankrupt effectively, and their bank sold their assets to an unknown major hardware vendor. But in general, the way I see it is a lot of these companies were very ambitious on the growth of AR, kind of like we saw with some VR companies that went under. They were overly ambitious with the market growth potential, and they raised a lot of money based on these overinflated value for the market for 2020 or 2025. And the reality of the market is it's a slow growth market. And without rapid growth, these companies can't justify their spend and their resources that they have and the people that they've hired. So you're even seeing some companies that are maybe not AR, but they're XR/VR/everything, like NextVR, who had to lay off a bunch of people,
right?
Because their entire business model is dependent on subscribers, and there just aren't enough subscribers to support the business model and at its current spend rate. So there's a lot of companies like that have been struggling to, address the market in a way that meets the market size today without going under. And I wrote a blog that went out yesterday actually about the XR industry, where we're at today, where it's going in the future, that actually addresses a lot of these companies' failures. Just because, we have to look at the failures, acknowledge them, see what they did wrong in order for the industry to move forward.
Yeah. Please share that link with me later. I would love to put it in the notes, your story, because I think that would be a really relevant thing since you wrote it.
Yeah. And the funny part is we had a meltdown, but, once you have a meltdown, there's always this fresh grass.
It reconsolidates, right? It re-gels basically into a more tight, like more organized, more powerful, glob.
Yeah, and I think Microsoft's HoloLens announcement at MWC is going to be a huge shot in the arm for AR. For
sure. Cool. Well, listen, we should probably wrap it up. We've covered all this stuff. I want you to tell people where they can find you. I mean, you're an analyst for, but you also write for Forbes, right?
Yeah, so I am an analyst at More Insights and Strategy. I write on Forbes and Upload VR, and I also tweet too much.
You tweet a lot, and it's good.
And I also publish some of my stuff on LinkedIn, but mostly Forbes, Upload VR, and Twitter.
What's your kind of corner for Forbes? Is it AR, VR?
It's kind of my main areas of coverage. So 4G, 5G, AR, VR, and smartphones mobility.
Fantastic. Tell people where they can find you on Twitter and maybe Instagram.
Sure. I'm on Twitter at AnshulSog, and I'm on Instagram with the same handle.
There you go. Easy peasy. Yeah, you should follow Anshul if you don't already. Great insights. Haha, more insights. Sorry, I had to. But mostly, seriously, it's I see Anshul all the time at all the various events we go to, and I've learned so much from talking to him, and great kind of like perspective on everything. So definitely somebody to follow. And you all know where to find me on the internets. I'm at Tankgirl. That's TNKGRL on Twitter and on Instagram. Named after Tankgirl, the comic book, but I couldn't get it with vowels, so I dropped the vowels. And as I always joke and say, before Flickr was smart and dropped the vowels too. I'm dating myself, I know. But also YouTube channel, the Mobile Tech Podcast YouTube channel is under my name, youtube.com/Miriam Joire. That's MY instead of MI. And if you want to see videos, unboxing, hands-on, first impressions, that kind of stuff from MWC when I go there and stuff from CS when I was there, that's the place to go because the podcast is audio only. So this is visuals to go with your podcast experience. So youtube.com/Miriam Joire. My full name is spelled out. If you need to spell that out, go to my Twitter at Tankgirl. It'll be spelled out there. mobiletechpodcast.com is the URL for the podcast. It's where you can find the RSS feed. But, of course, I'm on all the platforms. Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Overcast, TuneIn Radio, a bunch of places. subscribe. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the videos, all that good stuff. Talk to me on Twitter. Tell me what you think, what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like us to talk about, all that good stuff. And the show wouldn't be complete if I didn't thank our sponsor, Audible. Audible.com is really the place to go for audiobooks. If you love audiobooks, if you love reading, but maybe you can't actually physically read a book on a Kindle or on paper, Audible.com is the place. So check it out. They've been supporting us for a really long time. There's a special offer in the description of the show. I'll give you the link right now. It's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. That's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. If you click through there and join Audible, you'll get a special deal, 30 days free trial, etc., and you'll support the podcast. So please consider doing it if you're not already an Audible customer. So thanks to Audible, and thanks to Anshul for being on the show. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
We'll have to have you on again, and we'll definitely see each other in Barcelona, right?
Yeah, see you soon.
All right, cool. Well, folks, that's it. So stay tuned for another show next week. Cheers, everybody.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.